CEO of Career Contessa. We are the largest online career resource built specifically for women, but don't worry, men are totally welcome and use our resources as well. We pretty much offer everything from daily career blog advice to online courses like you mentioned. We have an anonymous salary database. Fun note about that is that we are the only website that gives you access to all of the salary data. Most salary databases just say, here's how your salary compares to other people who are similar. So it's a fun little rabbit hole to go down and spend hours looking at the salaries of other people. We have a podcast. I most recently published my first book. It's called Power Moves: How Women Can Pivot, Reboot, and Build a Career Purpose. And then also, just as far as my background, I was a recruiter at Hulu. I wrote my master's thesis on millennial women and career resources, and Career Contessa was actually built out of that process. So just overall obsessed with learning about kind of the job market, how people actually get hired, how they actually move up in the workplace. And we say that our goal at Career Contessa is to help you build a successful, healthy, and fulfilling career.
I forgot to mention that super important thing. You just wrote a book, Power Moves, and you guys for joining. Actually, one of you is going to win a copy of the book. There it is. It's beautiful red. I like it. So after this event, I'm going to reach out to one of you attendees and tell you that you won the book. So thanks for giving that away, Lauren. Appreciate it. So you've been doing this for a long time. You were a recruiter in the tech space before starting Career Contessa. Now you've been doing the whole career coaching thing for a long time. A lot of people haven't job searched in some of them decades. I know there's folks on here who have been employed at the same place for 20 years. Mm-hmm. What has changed since you've entered the recruiting career world into today? What are some of the biggest changes you've seen in the last 10 or 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I can probably mostly focus on the last 10 years since that's pretty much around the time that I entered the job market. But even in the last 10 years, it's changed a lot. I know that, for example, if it's been a while since you've job searched, just the fact that there's online job search portals, and that happens to be the way that most people are applying for jobs and companies are looking for talent. LinkedIn is obviously a game changer in that, most of us, like when I was a recruiter, I spent all day on LinkedIn sourcing candidates, reaching out to candidates. So I wasn't necessarily going through, paper resumes all the time, for example. So those are some of the obvious things that have changed a lot. Networking has probably always been really valuable for finding a job, but now there's sort of these new rules of networking, since a lot of it is online networking, staying in touch. But companies also offer their employees an incentive to refer other employees and want to hire them. So if anything, I would say there's two things that have happened to the job market. It's gotten easier to apply for jobs, but also that makes it much more competitive. The other thing I think for employees, this is a positive, is like you're able to learn so much more about a company and a role before you get there and what's happening. So we also see people move jobs more often than maybe, especially 20 years ago, but even 10 years ago. So those are some of the obvious, I think. But I mean, the rules are changing all the time. I mean, COVID has changed, just the job application process and how people are finding jobs, for example.
Yeah, let's talk very quickly about COVID, because that was, coming into 2020, things had changed a lot. It was easier to apply for jobs. LinkedIn made finding people easier. People were changing jobs more often. Now, 2020 changed a lot. And I think there were two things. One of the bigger changes was that there were two things that really changed a lot. The first is a lot more competition, which creates a lot more of a need to stand out. And the second thing was everything went virtual, which means on the plus side, it is now all of a sudden pretty easy to connect with somebody for a 15-minute call, because you know where they are. They're home. They're not busy. They're not traveling. They're not on vacation. And they're all on LinkedIn all day long or on Twitter or somewhere. But also, as I was talking with somebody in this group a little bit ago, she's a type A personality. She's a speaker. She's gung-ho. And sometimes getting that across virtually becomes a little bit more difficult. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that you've been advising people to think about as these two realities really came to bear? There's a lot of competition, and virtual changes the playing field for a lot of people who really think they developed a strength in the physical world.
Yeah, I would say the first thing that COVID did is it really knocked out any historical trends. So normally there's a lot of, hiring and also it used to be the power was in the employee's hand, not the employers, right? So right before COVID, people felt like there's lots of open jobs, I can apply for them. It didn't seem like there was huge stiff competition, and you knew that January or the new year and around fall there was usually kind of an influx in hiring needs. That's when companies would kind of plan out months in advance what roles they were going to have open, etc. It's not working like that. I mean, people have so much uncertainty that this whole plan, for who you're going to hire in the fall is sort of out. So those historical trends are really challenging for companies right now, which makes it challenging for all of us. Obviously, when roles do open right now, it's extremely competitive because the unemployment rate is higher than it's ever been before. So there's more people applying for roles than there are actually roles available. The other thing that we're seeing is certain industries are just essentially annihilated. So if you worked in events and you always felt kind of the security of being able to go from like hotel events to, an event agency to this, like maybe your whole industry is just on pause right now, where another industry might be like booming and they can't even keep up with the demand of how many roles they have open. So there's like this huge unequal balance there. The other thing I would say that COVID has done, and I don't necessarily think this is a huge benefit, but there's actually a big rise in temp work, freelance work, gig work, project-based work. And so a lot of employers are cutting back and saying, maybe we don't do the whole full-time person where we give them, benefits and a salary that they can depend on. Instead, we're going to hire them for just this project. Now, that might be good if you've been laid off and you're like, look, I'd rather do something more, it's better. Doing it like a consulting project here and there is better than doing nothing. I agree with that. The challenge that we're going to have moving forward is that doesn't help build a great long-term employee workforce. And that's not also great for the employee. So again, a lot of power has sort of been shifted to the employer. Where literally right before COVID, employers were really struggling to hold on to talent and they were thinking about how can we retain them more. I think also, recruiting is going to become more automated just because again there's so much competition, so they're depending a lot more on those applicant tracking systems to weed out the resumes that come through, and just depending a little bit more on the tech because they have to, there's too many applicants. So those are just sort of like some of the things I'm seeing that have changed with COVID. Not the obvious of like people have been laid off who were highly skilled and they were laid off for no reason that other related to performance. It's just like their company had to make tough calls, and now what do you do with too much amazing talent looking for too few job openings?
Yeah, I want to double click on two of those points you made. The first being some industries were really hit hard and are not coming back anytime soon. The other being this shift to project-based work. So starting with the first one, I know people on this call come from the events industry, come from hospitality. There's a few people here from aviation. Those are
Mhm.
industries with tough hit. I can see things like aviation coming back a little bit faster than things like hospitality or things like in-person events. If somebody comes to you, and I know you guys do a lot of coaching, so you've heard this a lot, but if somebody comes to you and says, look, I'm from one of these industries that had a rough 2020, is going to have a pretty brutal 2021, and I can't even speak for what 2022 is going to bring, but I love the industry, right?
Mhm.
It's what I know. It's what I've been doing for a long time. What's the advice there? Where does adaptability come in? Where does sticking to your guns and saying, look, I'm going to be one of the remaining events pros when it really comes back in a big way in 2022 versus saying, look, I'm making a full pivot and I'm totally running away into, SaaS cloud services, which I think everybody is now. But what's the advice there?
I mean, that's such a personal opinion, or, you have to personally decide, are you going to hold to your guns and say, I want the event job? I would say that you can do it that way, but that's not a great skill set to be like, I'm so stubborn, I'm unwilling to pivot or adapt to how things are changing. Instead, I would say, look through the lens of the fact, okay, if you were in events right now, there's a huge shift to virtual events. So can you learn the technology and start attending virtual events and learning how you might be able to go work for a company, and instead of putting on in-person events, you put on virtual events. I had a friend who I knew who used to do all these, I live in Los Angeles, so all these big party events for, entertainment, the red carpet, that kind of thing. And I was like, well, everybody's now trying to figure out how to quickly run like Zoom conferences and again, like these big virtual events that maybe they had before. And I was like, you should learn how to do that and then market that skill. And she's like, I don't really want to learn how to do that. And it's like, okay, well, if you don't want to learn how to do that, then events isn't going to be for you for right now, maybe in the future. But then it comes down to, okay, what transferable skills do you have? So for her, it was like, but I really like project management. Okay, then that is a really transferable skill. And now the question is, what industries and companies do you want to work for that would need that skill set and that you could add the value for? So I look at it as like stepping stones to maybe the full pivot or what you want to do next. So for example, starting with, here's what I have right now, here's what I want, or which of those skill sets I'm willing to pivot and adapt to, and then figuring out how you can fill the skills gaps along the way. So for her, for project management, for example, the first thing is figuring out, okay, well, would you want to do something in entertainment? Do you want to do something for like an agency? Kind of figuring out where you want to go. And then saying, all right, if I want to work for an agency, maybe I don't need to have some project management certification. That's going to rely a lot more on like networking and setting up some sort of portfolio site to show off that skill set, right? So kind of thinking about, well, where do I want to go, and then working back from there. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of people oftentimes, is they're like, I need a new job, my industry's gone or whatever like that, but they're so overwhelmed on how to get from where they are to then figuring out, okay, well, what is it that I want to do? And so one thing I will say, like when I was a recruiter, I used to get very frustrated because people would come to us and they would say, well, what are you guys looking for? What are you hiring for? And we would always respond, well, what are you looking for? What are you hiring for? We're not in the business as recruiters, especially now, to just be handing out jobs to people so that they can have a salary. It doesn't work like that, right? We're in the business of solving problems that our company has, or the challenge we have, or we need a person to come in and manage this thing. So you coming to me and saying, this is what I want, here's my skill set, and here's how it's going to benefit you, is so much more powerful than being the person who's like, well, what are you guys looking for? I can kind of do everything. I used to do this before, but I think I have these transferable skills. I can't do anything with that. And honestly, I don't have time to figure out where to place you. And so I will completely say, in a very kind way, and every recruiter will say this to you, it's not a fit right now, but we'll hold on to your information. They don't have time for that. So you have to do this legwork for them. And I know that might sound harsh, but sometimes I think the best advice, and especially in times like this, is like, tell people how it's really working on the back end. Don't sugarcoat it and give them hope when that doesn't exist for those roles, for example, or that company, for example.
Right. And that's where things like, and you guys have written a lot about this, but things like informational interviews come in, because understanding from the people who are employed at that company, what their big problems are, what kinds of things they're hiring for now, might be hiring for in 3 months, where you might fit in, so that you have all of that knowledge before you ever apply, before you ever even talk to a recruiter. So that once you are there for, exactly, tell them where you can provide value, Bobby, so that when you are there for a recruiter, you can really excel there.
Yeah.
Also, Barbara, tell me a little more about what you mean. Is there a service that can help you hone in on where your skills fit best? Tell me a little more about what you mean by that.
Well, what Lauren just said is basically, don't come to me and say, what are you hiring for? I do come from an IT background, but I went wide with my skills. So I have more soft skills and a definitive, I'm not a programmer, a network administrator, but I have a lot of IT, experience. I worked in the collaboration space, the mobility space. So is there some sort of guru that can look at, what your skills are and say, you could fit in here or here? I mean, I've assessed that maybe I could be in customer success. I can work for a carrier. But I'm just looking for someone that could help me hone in so I can tell a recruiter what I'm looking for.
Yeah. So I think that you can certainly hire someone to help you take a strengths assessment or strengths find, or, one of those things. That's all great. And I think that self-awareness, and the more you know about yourself, the easier it is. But at the end of the day, as a recruiter, me knowing that you have great whatever communication skill, that's good, but I need to know specifically, like, this job description is looking for someone who knows CMS, or I don't know, customer experience software, or whatever it is, right? And so at the end of the day, I would say one of the best things you could do, or like a hack I have for kind of figuring this out and then using the vocabulary that we're using so that we're all speaking the same language, is go and figure out, okay, like when people are challenged with this, the first thing I'll tell them is, why don't you create a list of target companies? So a list of companies that really fit and align with you and where you are right now in your life. For example, maybe you really want to work for a tech company. Maybe you love this company because you have depended on their products during quarantine like none other. So sometimes you can start there with like, okay, these are my target companies. Learn everything you can about the company. If you're like, I think this would be a good fit, I could see myself working here, then you would go one level further down and look at the roles that they have. And the job descriptions are really the key here. So job descriptions, we spend a ton of time writing about, or writing and working with hire managers to understand what's the skill set that they want. So for you, let's say Amazon makes it onto your target company list. You learn everything about them. They happen to be remote right now, but maybe they have roles open nearby you when they do open back up. They hire plenty of people with IT backgrounds, right? So you start there, then you start looking at their open roles. When you find a job title or a job description that really interests you, at Amazon, you're going to maybe print that out or hold on to that, and then go take that same job title, put it into like LinkedIn or Indeed, one of these big job sites, and find 5 or 6 other job descriptions for that same job title. So let's just say IT manager. Let's use that example. So you've got it at Amazon, but then you type in IT manager, and the goal here is to find 5 or 6 examples of these job descriptions that companies that are maybe similar to Amazon. Maybe you do someone who's also in tech, someone who's also in carrier, whatever like that. And then go through with a fine-tooth comb and highlight what are the commonalities between all of these jobs. That will really help you narrow down into like, okay, what are the main skill sets for this type of role? So these are hacks that you can do. I mean, the other thing you can do, that's like, if you're like, I have no idea where to start, I need someone else to give me the words to use. That's my first tip. If you are a person where you're like, I'm not ready for that, I kind of want to do more of this, like, reflection work, then I would say, okay, go on a listening tour, go interview the people who you've worked with before, take the strengths finder things, and start to understand what are the words people use to describe your skill sets, your strengths. This is a lot of self-reflection work, which is why I don't always believe that you can pay someone else to help you do this, because at the end of the day, the person who knows your skill set is you. The person who's going to get on the phone with your past colleagues and managers to understand what were your go-to things, it's like, it's got to be you. So those are kind of areas, or 2 separate strategies you could use to narrow in on like, what are you known for? It's not that being a generalist is a bad thing. It's that you can't sell that very well, right? So even though you might have these general skills and you can do a lot of different things, when you get to that recruiter, you're selling them on this one thing that they need solved, and you're the person to solve it. So it's okay that you are this generalist, but that's not how you're going to sell it to them. You're going to sell it as, I'm the solution to your problem. An example of this was, I was an admin assistant. I really wanted to be a recruiter. I had never been a recruiter before. So I went on all these informational interviews with recruiters, and I used those informational interviews to understand what are the top skill sets that these people have to be successful. And if you have enough of this stuff, or you look at enough of those job descriptions, you'll see common themes. Then what you do is you start making all of your background, experience, resume, interview language to focus on that. So for example, in recruiting, it was a lot about candidate experience. There was a lot about organization. So I took like these common themes and I just like kept throwing them in everyone's face. Like, I'm great at candidate experience. Maybe it was for admissions for a university, but at the end of the day, candidate versus a student, like, they're all people who need support. So I would say, try those, and also don't get so hung up on the fact that like, oh, I'm a generalist and I didn't do it. It's okay. Our goal is to narrow in on the themes, and then you're going to sell and throw that out as much as you can.
That's right. Your goal is not to become their CEO. It's not to get a promotion. It's to get the job. And to get the job, you got to show that you can do one thing well. And once you got the job, show them that you can do a dozen other things well. And they'll be like, oh my God, this person's incredible. Got to promote them up the chain so they can manage everybody. But in the beginning, depending on what your kind of job you're going for, you got to keep it simple, stupid is my favorite phrase from business school, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Make them remember that one thing about you that they really, really, really need and that you figured out that they need because you read their quarterly reports, did a bunch of interviews with other people in similar roles to them, whatever it was, and that'll help on that. Lauren, my second question, back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, is project-based work. It's been a tough year for people because, very bluntly, financially, it's been pretty crummy for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And there's not a super clear end in sight. Project-based work comes up and there's a lot of pros to it. Great way to fill your time, to build some skills, to prove that you can do something, to have a portfolio of work, to build your network. Also some challenges to it. Sometimes it doesn't pay very well, certainly doesn't have benefits. Sometimes it pays worse than you might imagine it because it's just like, hey, we'll find anybody to do this. It's just a quick, we need 20 hours here. What's your thought on project-based work? Are there good times to take it? Are there bad times to take it? Should job seekers be actively pursuing some sort of project work at all times or only take it if it falls on their lap? What's your thought on project-based work?
I mean, there's no, blanket answer for this either. I would say, taking on, I think being realistic about what will work for you is the best way to think about it. And then when you are going to take on the temporary work, if it's like, okay, I'm willing to do this temporarily, but I really want to work for this company long-term, then communicate your intentions upfront with the company right away. So I think, for example, the person who got laid off and they're at home homeschooling kids and life is crazy, project-based work right now might be great because they don't know when their kid's going to go back to school or et cetera, right? That. So a lot of this depends just on your life circumstances. If you are a person who is like, I really want full-time work. I don't want to do this project-based thing, but I got offered this project-based thing. And is it better than nothing? You'll have to decide, is it worth taking that and being, working on that for 6 months and kind of taking away from your job search during that time, maybe like full-time job search efforts during that time, only and your bank account knows, how long your runway is. But I would say that communication upfront with a company and kind of letting them know your intentions and what you hope for the role is one of the best things you can do if you are going to take the project-based or the temp-based work in the meantime. I'm not a huge fan, and I guess this is just from the employer perspective, of people who take the project-based work and then they're like, well, if I find the full-time job, I'll just ditch them. I mean, that is like going to kill your relationship with them. So be really thoughtful. It would be much better to tell the person, like, I really want to do this. I know I could do a great job for you. The reality is, like, I've got momentum in my job search right now, and I've got to find the full-time job. I have to prioritize the full-time job. So I have to turn this down. Like, again, communicating your intentions. I have to turn this down, not because I don't love your company or want to be part of it. And they might come back to you and say, you know what, we're willing to compromise, come on board full-time or something. Or they might come back in a couple months, or they might appreciate the fact that you are so open and honest with them that when they do have a full-time role, they'll come to you. So, yeah, I think it all depends on your circumstances. And a lot of that is your personal circumstances, your financial circumstances. And I would say if you are trying to make a career transition, we talked about pivots in the beginning of this conversation, and this is an opportunity to have that thing on your resume as your pivot or your transition, then that's great, and I would prioritize that, the fact that someone's giving you a shot and saying, hey, we'll come in and have you do this project in, customer service for 6 months, and maybe that's the industry you want to, transition into or something like that.
Yeah. I want to take this and talk a little bit about the future, specifically industries that you think are growing, trends that you like to see. And then we're going to talk a little bit about job search tools. And again, this is where I want to remind everyone, in about 10 minutes or so, we're going to break up into groups, network, and I want you all to introduce yourselves, say who you are, what kind of work you're looking for. And then the one tool trick community that you want to take from 2020 into 2021 and recommend looking forward. And if you have any questions over the next 10 minutes, please drop them in the chat and feel free to get involved. So Lauren, you started Career Contessa or you work on your master's right after the last recession around '09. You kind of saw this trend that by 2020, 50% of the workforce will be women. You sort of realize that nobody's really serving that role properly. And you started off small, wrote a few blogs, then bit by bit expanded. And now you're one of the largest names, maybe the largest name in women's career. I guess maybe coaching is the wrong word here, women's career education. Where do you think people should be looking to find trends looking forward? Not everyone here is going to be an entrepreneur. Some people I know are already starting small businesses, consulting, doing their own projects, and I think that's amazing. But a lot of people who come from those industries that might be having trouble want to be looking into the future and saying, hey, I've got 10 or 20 years left of the workforce and I want to do an incredible job there. Where should they be looking? How can they be identifying some of those trends looking forward? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, I think industries that are going to continue to grow and really prosper, obviously tech, and that could be a big tech company who is maybe doing something for consumers, like an Amazon, for example. There's like a big tech company, or even like working in a tech related role. So, IT management, software development, front end, back end, all of that kind of stuff. Healthcare and health tech, those are also industries that I think are going to be growing a lot. And health tech is really interesting because, for example, my brother-in-law works in sales, but he works for a company that does it where what do you call it, where you get like the signature, the e-signature thing. So the whole company is all about e-signature. And then he works in the healthcare part of that. So his function is sales, right? But he focused in on a company that is tech and in health, right? So he's kind of mixing all these things. So I'm speaking specifically about industries. So health and healthcare / health tech, fintech. So even before the pandemic, financial services industry was trending toward online banking and a bunch of online stuff. And I think COVID really accelerated this transition away from this brick and mortar presence. And so we're likely to see more jobs in fintech sectors. E-commerce, I think that's been maybe the most obvious, is that, what's going to happen with physical storefronts, we don't know, but e-commerce is probably going to continue to grow. Maybe, especially, for example, a lot of small businesses had to quickly shift and set up Shopify sites, or there's an Etsy or whatever it is. So I think companies that were already online or were able to navigate that transition to selling almost exclusively through the web will likely continue adding headcount to meet the demands of 2021. So these could be direct to consumer companies, things like that. Customer service, I actually think there's going to be a lot of demand around anything involving customer service, customer experience, whatever word we're putting on it, and that's another thing about job titles and kind of functions, is like, there's all these like fun names for stuff sometimes. But most notably the software and the companies who rely on this virtual business for remote work. So for example, when you are on a website and like the little chat pops up to offer you some help, like look at those kind of companies. And then I would say the next industry is maybe energy, I guess. I think that's been trending upward for a while as we've become increasingly aware of the climate crisis, and it looks like climate change is going to be a top priority for the next presidential administration. So that's another thing I would look into, is like, if you have an interest in this, is like, who's doing really cool things in the green energy space, and are they part of large companies? Are they part of startups? Right now, I would say that a lot of people are probably going to tend to lean toward the larger companies right now. They're just going to feel like those are a safer bet than the startup. There's nothing wrong with the startup, but just make sure they're extremely well funded and ask them, what is your runway? And ask these really important and specific questions in the interview process.
Yeah, I'd add two things there. One is, if you're interested in startups, we're doing an event on January 19th where a vice president at Facebook, former chief product officer at Credit Karma, amazing guy, is going to be speaking, as well as a venture capital recruiter who looks at later stage companies. So that could be a fit there. So come join that. But with startups, if you're interested in any phase of a startup, so I mean, Riveter's a startup, but don't come work for us. Very risky. A lot of fun though, great culture, nice people. But startups mean a lot of things. If you're a company that just raised $100 million Series D round anytime in the last 3 months, which is something you can easily find, go to a website called crunchbase.com and look at companies that have raised their Series D round. They've got a lot of money to blow, and they're spending that on new hires. That is a company that is looking at new people and they're looking for people to bring in. So if that is a remarkable, so if you don't want to go for like a Fortune 1000 public company, you want to go for something a little bit smaller, Crunchbase, and then find the right level of funding. Maybe you want something really early, Series A or B, where they've raised $5 to $50 million, maybe something a little bit later, a little more mature, and you'll find them in any sector. On that note, one of my favorite bits of advice that I've heard over the last year is that when you're thinking about everything Lauren said, right? Do I care about healthcare? Do I care about education, online education, huge industry over the next 5 years? So much is going to happen there. Whatever industry you're thinking about, whatever role you want to think about there, start thinking about what your unique take on it is, right? I'm a little, and for those who have been to these events before, you've heard me talk about how like, I'm a little sick of the advice of like, oh, go become a LinkedIn influencer. Don't forget to post 8 times a day and get to 80 trillion followers or whatever. I think the best kind of content you can be putting out there is thoughtful content about the future of this industry that you're interested in. So if you think healthcare is an industry that you as a salesperson or an IT manager or a customer support person can do a lot in, talk about what the future of customer support in healthcare is. Write a few blog posts about it, because those are the kind of things that when you come to people in companies and say, hey, I've been thinking about this. Do you think about this? That creates really interesting conversations. That gives you amazing fodder for interviews to say, you know what, I actually wrote 2 blog posts about where this industry is going, or how to be a great manager in this industry, or how to deal with this particular company that's a big competitor of yours. And that gives you so much credibility, gravitas, as you approach this job search. Lauren, one of the last lines of questions I want to talk about is very specific tools and tricks, because that's also what we're going to talk about when we break off into networking groups. I was reading the reviews for your book, Power Moves, and I haven't read the book yet, but the reviews, almost every single one of them talked about being very actionable. One woman said that she had to keep putting the book down in order to go do something so that she doesn't forget to do something, because you kept telling people to do things. So my question is that accurate?
Yeah, no, I take more of a boot camp approach to my, as you guys can tell, like I don't like to sugarcoat things. I will tell you exactly how it is. And I do feel like being abstract when it comes to career stuff, like to Barbara's question or point about like, you can tell me to find my strengths and my skill sets, but what the hell does that actually mean? Like, talk about pet peeves. Like, that is a pet peeve I have, is like, don't throw out this idea for people and then not give them the tools to actually be able to answer or talk about it in an interview, that in your work and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I would say that's an actionable, or that is an accurate description of my style.
Good. So now let's get some actionability. If you guys don't have enough notes after today, you're about to get some more.
Yeah.
Tell me, what are some of your favorite tools or tricks or communities that you really value and that you send a lot of people towards? These can be some of your own. One of my favorite of yours, just to plug it for you, is your interview flashcards. Super helpful, a lot of questions that you might expect, and just gives you the framework to practice. What are some of the places that you send job seekers for any stop of the job search? Everything from resume writing, interview prep, unemployment benefits, whatever you think is important for job seekers. Where do you send folks?
Yeah, I will say the good news about the book is that it's really a collection of all my favorite things over the last 7 years. So that is sort of the one-stop shop. Otherwise, I would say, Career Contessa, we've made most of the resources free. And also, I have an education background, so I'm very big on like worksheets and templates and scripts. If you just follow us on Instagram, you'll see that every day we provide daily tips, and we even provide templates. So like, how do you write this email to this employer or this person about XYZ? So I'm a visual learner. I like to see an example in order to be able to do whatever it is that you're telling me to do. So I'm going to probably say most of the things I really like, we create at Career Contessa, and we do it in that style. So if that's your style, then you're going to like Career Contessa. Our downloads are all free worksheets, for example. A place to go for resumes. I mean, we have a resume course for this exact reason, because I felt like there were either the advice around resumes were either like, go buy a template off of Etsy or buy this person's really expensive resume course, which doesn't make any sense. So everything is super affordable too. And most of it's even free on Career Contessa. The other tool I really like that you can do for free all on your own is keeping a work journal. So, and we have a great article on Career Contessa about how to do this. I talk about it in the book. I think there's a lot of things that people can do to sort of create that self-awareness or keep track of sort of what interests them, what do they really want in their next job. And what happens is people kind of get focused on this and they want all the answers in the first hour, and it doesn't happen like that. So a work journal is a really good tool to kind of create a daily habit that helps you kind of keep track about, okay, what did I do well today? What did I get, feedback that I need to improve on? What are my interpersonal challenges? Like, none of this stuff can be figured out without kind of like tracking and observing it, and like recognizing those patterns. So that's a free tool that I'm a big fan of. In terms of like outside websites that I like, I mean, I'm still a huge fan of LinkedIn. I mean, I still think there's newsletters, there's events on there, there's people to connect with. I think of LinkedIn as sort of like, it's like the target of, job stuff. And then I would say it's always good to have the place where you can go for a lot of stuff, but then find your like curated resources. So find places that are within your niche, communities. There's a community related to everything out there on the internet. So whatever you work in, someone is out there who's doing it, and it's attracting people who are also interested in similar niches. There's a new website, I think it's called JobScan, and they'll scan your resume for you. I think it's free. I don't totally know. That one's not bad. I also am a big fan of, I listen to a lot of books on Audible. So, leadership and just career advice and kind of general, I think taking the approach of treating career development as an ongoing process and less of a like one-stop destination of like, I'm doing this to get that job is a good habit to create too. And then I think the question always is like, well, how do I do that in a manageable way? It's like carving out 1 hour a week to listen to a podcast, a book on tape. Those are like some of my favorite tools. I also am a big fan of people starting like a book club for networking. So doing the thing where you pick maybe a career book and then you invite 5 friends and you all read it together, and then you ask them to invite somebody. So like, that's a really great natural way to be able to expand your networking, but have like a purpose to the networking. And people love book clubs, especially right now in quarantine. So I mean, I guess those are, it's not like specific tools and tricks, but like, I'm very biased in that I like the style of how we do things at Career Contessa with the templates and the worksheets. And that gives people, I think, a good start. And then they can go and find further down a niche for their particular industry or interest.
Awesome. Laura, well, I really appreciate you joining us. Folks, thank you to all of you for joining for part 1. Really appreciate it. So here's what's going to happen next. Lauren, can I ask you for one favor? Over the next 20 minutes or so, can you find, you said you had a great article about work journals.
Mm-hmm.
Can you find that? And then when we all gather back here in 17 minutes, just put that into the chat so folks can find that directly. So folks, I'm about to open up 3 breakout rooms. There's going to be 7 people each. This part's super important, so don't leave. Great opportunity to be able to network and share tips that are valuable. So come in there. And what I want you to do is to all go around and say something like this. My name's Adriel. I'm looking for sales role in the high technology industry, like in self-driving cars, which is where I came from before this. And one of my favorite tips for that I'm taking from 2020 into 2021 is setting accountability, setting goals for every week. So every Monday morning, we've been doing our Monday motivations event, and I set personal and professional goals for every week. And I've loved doing that, never done it before, and I'm taking that forward. So that's how I would answer that question. Should be enough time for everybody to go around, throw a little chit chat in there. And then in 16 minutes on the hour, we'll come back here and we'll say our goodbyes. So folks, the rooms are open. Feel free to hop in. Lauren's going to be in one of them. I'm going to join another, maybe hop around a little bit, and we'll see you back here soon.